Hi, welcome to the Israel First television program. Great to have you with us. Thank you so much for joining us today and being with us here from our studio in Jerusalem. I'm bringing you news, interviews and behind the scenes reports from the land of Israel. And in the studio today, we have a very special guest. We have Rabbi Abe Reichman. Great to have you with us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us today. And of course, your center, the center Abe works for, the CJCUC, has been in the news. This is the Times of Israel, which is very popular news reporting service. It says, Orthodox rabbis, Christianity is a part of God's plan. Dr. Eugene Korn helps draft statements. And it talks about the fact that rabbis are signing a statement acknowledging the fact that the issue with Christians, because for a long time this was and still is today a thorny issue, that they're accepting for Christians to be part of God's plan. So, and you can go online and look at that and see all the information about this fantastic development that's happening in Jewish-Christian relations, that we are in this day, there is bridges being built and connections being made, and what an exciting time. Being in Jerusalem, we're coming up to the 50 years of Jerusalem, and right here in the center you've got the Bible study, and you're doing things in the community, and you're teaching Christians on a regular basis, on a weekly basis, so very, very exciting.
It really is, and it's exciting on our part to be the first such Orthodox organization, I dare say to you, of many to come, reaching out to bridge and to develop a much better world.
Now, some Christians, you might be watching today and you say, well, Martin, you know, why is it that this is so important or significant? What you might not realize is that the relations between Christians and Jews has been very, very difficult because of of course, in recent years, the Holocaust and the pogroms and the, going back in centuries, anti-Semitism. And so there's really been a big wall or a division. And so this is why it's so exciting. And you may not know that these are days where the bridges are being built and we're starting to see connections. And so it's quite amazing, really.
If you talked about 50 years to the unification of Jerusalem, I think unification is a good word. I think, let's go for it. We're there.
So tell us a bit about yourself. You're originally from Israel, but you moved as a youngster to the United States.
United States of America, right. Parents came here. They were Holocaust survivors, and they came here. I was born here, moved to the States, educated in the States, and then after we married, my wife and I, and had 2 kids in the States, we felt that Israel is the land of calling. And so we came to live in Israel many years ago. And I've been involved in all sorts of Jewish educational enterprises. For me, my greatest contribution was working under the aegis of the Jewish Agency in various Jewish communities the world over. And this reaching out to the Christian world is a recent, in a formal way, it's a recent entity that I've been doing, initiative that I've gotten involved with. But it goes back to my youth, where I encountered a very incredible person who was of the first in the post-Holocaust generation to reach out to do Christian relations, A.J. Heschel, in the 1960s.
And we've got such an amazing picture, Abe. We showed it, maybe if you caught the show last time Abe was on, you will have seen it, but I still want to show it again. This is a picture of the rabbi who you're talking about, who was, and this is the march at Selma. Some of you may have seen the movie Selma, but this is a picture we have on the picture. We've got Dr. Martin Luther King, and also there's the rabbi
Abraham Joshua Heschel.
Had a bigger impact on you as a youngster.
Absolutely. I mean, to me, this is awe to see that. Absolutely. And to think that this is the same man who at the same time was reaching out to what we today would refer to as the other, whether it's then they were called black people, today Afro-Americans, African Americans, and at the same time the Christian world. So building bridges is, I think, very deeply touching to me, and that's what we're doing.
And you've just recently started working for CJCUC. So how did you come across David and the center? And
I was teaching in all sorts of realms and entities and initiatives, and the cutting edge to me seems to be the Jewish Christian platform, and I looked it up and I pursued it, and here I am. If you will it, it can come, it can be. So we'll do it. We'll do it.
And I know that you're very keen to speak about Moses today. And for those of you they've got their Bibles ready, and maybe they can look this up, or.
Oh, absolutely. So if you have your Bibles ready, you can look up at Deuteronomy chapter 31, and from there to the last 3-4 chapters. And last 4 chapters of the book, and the last days of the end of days for Moses, and it's a very, very touching period of time where it's his last day. We're chapter 31, verse 1, and Moses goes out to the people, and he's talking to them individually, and he's saying goodbye. Well, individually probably not, but as tribes, probably, and he's a very contented man. Right? We kind of have a sense, if we leave a general feeling, that there was a lot of contentiousness, a lot of anger, if you will, or even disappointments, all sorts of negatives.
Frustration, really.
Yeah. Okay. And Moses' frustration that he. And upset he's not allowed into the promised land.
Right, because the story is that Moses took the people of Israel out of Egypt, crossing the Red Sea and going into the wilderness, but he never got as far as bringing them into the land of Israel.
Of all of them, he was the only one. Well, he and Aaron were the only ones of the leaders who were left behind. They were not allowed.
And that was because of the rock. He struck the rock. Is that right?
That's what we allocated to. He struck the rock. But if we want to be really, I think, fair and understanding, and think much more of less of sin and more of reality testing, I think there was a sense that his time had come, and it was time for new leadership. It's a different challenge. It's a different world, and that's Joshua.
Which is the big issue, having to pass on.
Oh man!
Passing
Can you imagine how difficult that was? Letting go. I mean, these are my babies. This is me. It's my dream. And I think the Torah is very, very sensitive in various realms. Maybe we'll touch on it today. But first and foremost, it tells us he was 120 years old, and it reminds us of Genesis, where God says 120 is the limit of man's life. And so you realize that it's not been cut off, but it's just not going to be extended, right? And what a difference it makes. And we get that sense in the text as well, where Moses starts to say goodbye and to explain and say, I now realize that I will not be joining you. It'll be, Joshua who will join you. And he encourages them. And then there's God, who's a little tougher than that. And if you'll take a look at, in chapter 31, starting at verse 14, after Moses has, handed over the mantle, if you will, to Joshua, and then God says to Moses, "Your days are numbered. Behold, you're about to die." And he says, "You're, about to die." And then comes verse 16, you will die, and the people will then go off the deep end. They're going to go off the track. And he gives them, fire and brimstone talk. And the irony is that God calls it this song, all right? And he challenges Moses in verse 19, please write this song down and teach it to the children of Israel, so that they will know forever that that's what I predicted.
Do you think there would have been fear amongst the people? Because here's the man who's been in the pillar of cloud, here's the man who's gone up the mountain and been in the presence of God, and who else? Who else is going to speak for us on behalf of the people? And we know that God will judge because of the golden calf and lots of other issues. And suddenly they have the possibility, the probability that he's not going to be there for them anymore.
But we also need to remember that they've, changed. That is, it's their children, right? So if we will, the younger generation looking at the older generation, and as great as Moses was, and we can always see him in the mythic stature that he was and continues to be, but on the other hand, he was a physical person, and they could see the aging, or they could see the older person, if not the aging. So it seems to be, as we read it now, it seems to be an appropriate transition, and yet it has its troubles, it has its tensions, but it also has its beauty of where God says, they're going to go off the track, Moses, I'm telling you. And you hear Moses absorbing God's message. He shares it with the people because that's his mission. His mission is no longer to be a lawyer on their behalf towards God, but at this point, he's giving that over to Joshua. So he shares it with them. But by the same token, he, at a certain point, says, in chapter 32, verse 44, and at the end of the whole poem of Ha'azinu, Moses comes and he speaks, it says, the words of this song, of this poem, in the ears of the people. And then when he finishes saying these words, Moses says to him, that is, he says the words of God to them, right? And then he puts in his own commentary and he says, I'm telling you, I am witnessing to you today, verse 46, that you command your children to keep these laws and regulations, but he calls them all the words of this Torah. Moses makes a shift. God calls the beware speech, or the fire and brimstone as a possibility, calls it song. And Moses kind of looks back in his 40 years and he said, we did a thing or two. We had some tough, rough spots in the beginning, but it worked out in the end. And I'm confident, hopeful, that you guys will be able to, take this Torah script and see it for its beginnings and bring it to endings different than which, God is predicting. And I dare say that Moses again is saying to God, it doesn't have to be as bad as you are saying it's going to be. I know these guys. And it's like he's bequeathing them benevolence and beauty and softness.
Which is very interesting, because when one of the issues that we've talked about Christian-Jewish relations, one of the issues we have is that Christians tend to, or we tend to, look at the Old Testament as being harsh, legalistic, sets of rules. Sometimes people will even say they're not even appropriate for Christians. And we tend to have this, and we tend to have that kind of background. A lot of people, maybe you watching today, you'll have this as a background, but it isn't like that, is it? That isn't the truth at all.
I think it's not the only way to look at it. I don't want to say it's not the only way to look at it. And I really wish that in this interaction, we soften both sides a little bit and we build a bridge that is strong and ever, developing, but with a softness, right? And I think that's the softness also between, the God-Moses relationship, where God says something strong and Moses softens it, and then Moses carries God's tough message, and then the beauty is that God takes on, if you will, if you read it carefully, Moses' soft message. And that's so very inspiring, touching to see that man, if you will, certainly Moses, can, if you will, guide God to soften the approach a little bit, if we dare be a little irreverent in that regard. So if you look carefully, God then tells him it's time to go. And if we move ahead very quickly to chapter 33, verse 29, Moses, at the end of all his blessings to all the tribes, he says, who is as great as Israel? Right? Where you're being aided by the Lord. He's on your side. And he's kind of predicting. You look at the end of verse 29. And your enemies may deny your existence. But you will tread on their stages. The end of days for Moses, or maybe even a picture of the ongoing development of where the state of Israel comes to be, or the Jewish people have a state, and there are many nations who are kind of looking to deny their right to have that.
It seems when I read that, it seems like this has been happening since the time of Moses. That anti-Semitism, the pogroms, the Holocaust, the denial of Israel, the battle for
they've had a tough time with
the
us.
Jewish people trying to return here, and the boats and the going missing, and the trying to immigrate into Israel.
But I really dare say again and again, that's what we're going to change. In building this thing, it's going to be a much softer model of acceptance, of understanding, of listening one to another. And that too that's exactly the model that's here. Moses listening to God, God listening to Moses, but they each say what they have to say. It's not like they're ignoring and they're erasing who they are. No, they maintain their identity, and yet at the same time allow for the identity of the other, to rise to the fore as well. And the beauty is when I think when God says, Moses dies, and the only one who, in verse 5, and Moses dies there, he is the servant of God. Okay? And there's only one being present at this funeral and burial, and that is God. The relationship between the two is at its holiest pinnacle at burial. It's as though nobody else could do as good a job and express that relationship and be there at the transition as those two, God and man, i.e. God and Moses. And then God says in words of praise, in verse 10, the last two verses of the whole Torah, the whole Bible, chapter 34, verse 10, to all the great miracles that God sent him to do, to Pharaoh and to all of his servants and to the whole land and to everything, the great hand, it was he, Moses, who was God's voice on this planet. And the touching part of there was no other person who ever had this relationship to whom God spoke in verse 10, the end of verse 10, right? And there never came to be such a prophet ever again in Israel as Moses. Now listen carefully to what it says. That God knew him face to face. It doesn't say, as great as Moses, that Moses knew God face to face. That God knew him face to face, as though God is saying, my greatest pride is that I knew that man like nobody else knew. And what an incredible way to finish a Torah that's meant to be not just the word of God, but it's the word of God as given to man to do something with it. Dare I say, to build relationships.
And the interesting thing is, I mean, there's a lot of things in that. I mean, the whole thing of the burial. We see today when you live in the land of Israel, when very sadly there's terrorism, things like that. We have the burials on the cemetery in Jerusalem, or the other cemeteries, the 3 teenagers who were killed in these burials, and we get the Prime Minister will go, and you imagine that it was God Himself who did the
Only.
Yeah.
And just only. It's an awesome scene. There is something deep there that says we don't want to make a deity of a human being, but there's something awesome that says the deity who says,
right,
I'm the only one.
Is that because
only I can do this?
Is that because some people think his body would have become like a golden calf, that people would go and worship it, and
we call it relics. What do we call those things of different parts of bodies that were taken from different places? Skeletons of this. Yeah, I think that we've heard that, and you can imagine what that would have been like.
But I think there's something deeper here with this connection with Him and God, and that God would even take care of the end of His days. Because you were saying that he was contented at the end of his life, because Moses was, because a lot of people think that he was a man full of frustration.
I think not. I think that was a process. I think that exactly that. The initial reaction was just that, because he was very focused on he wants to get to the land. And I think he came to realize that his challenge or his charge was to get the people to want to go to the land. And that he accomplished. And that he could do by looking back, and very proudly, I think, not arrogantly, but proudly and with deep understanding. And I think that that's the way God chooses to finish the Torah, the achievements of Moses, to allow the people to feel that they've achieved something, as opposed to the achievements of Moses, and they're just like objects of Moses and God's achievements. That's not, I think, much deeper message here of that Moses-God relationship as a model, dare we say, for all relationships that imbue each other and respect each other with.
Now I'm going to try and squeeze on, because I know time's against us, but I've got a picture here, Abe. I don't know if you've probably seen. This is the back of Abe and Rabbi Abe, and he's next to a van full of equipment. Maybe you can tell us a bit about that. What's happening here?
Well, there was some fires that took place in various communities in Israel. The famous ones are Haifa, but this is in the heartland of Israel, a community called Chalamish. And there were about 30 homes that were burnt down, 15 that were totally gutted. So the center, CJCUC, under the leadership of David Nick-Rootman, went out and recruited or generated fundraising, fundraised.
And people can give to that even today if they're watching. They can go onto your website, can they, and help? Absolutely.
You can go directly, and we can say straightforward that this is net. There's no overhead that we take or anything. We're actually involved in doing it ourselves, buying the materials. So these were heaters and toaster ovens and mattresses, heaters, all kinds of material that people need for the here and now that we delivered yesterday. So we hope that for Shabbat that people will have in their homes.
Right. I don't know so much about this myself, but are the people having to move out of the community, or are they staying in a hall?
Several people moved out of. People had to move out of the community. Some of them moved nearby, others to family, obviously. But there's a massive rebuilding project that's going on. People will be initially allowed to live in caravans, and then they will take the 1 to 2 years that it takes to rebuild everything from the ground up for some of the homes that were destroyed totally.
We're out of time. It's been so good to be with you. Thank you so much for joining us from Rabbi Abe Reichman from the CJCUC Center, and from myself. Thank you so much for joining us on the Israel First TV program, and see you next time.
Wonderful to be with you again today. We are looking again at the Hebrew language and the beauty of it. So today is the 11th letter, and is the letter Kaf. And you see, it's a letter with this shape. And the name is also kaf, the palm of your hand. Now it's interesting because it's a letter who does a lot of things. First of all, you have the kaf with the dot inside when you write it, and it's a k, kaf. Okay, but when you don't have the dot inside, the sound is different, and it's like ch, like bach. Like when we say king, for example, is melech. You can hear it's not a k, it's melech. Okay, so this is what's happening with the letter. And one other thing also is the letter, which is interesting, is the first letter of the alphabet that we can see, who can have two shapes. When it's in the middle of the word or at the beginning, is a kaf like that, as we said. But when it's at the end of it, it will change shape and it won't be bent. So it will be like standing, okay, like that. And which is like exactly for the name Melech, the king. Also something else with the letter kaf, we can learn few names. Like kaf is also a spoon, because it's like a little container who can, have something inside. And so kaf is a spoon, and kapit is a little spoon. And also kaf is used for saying like for example, this is a tree and it's called etz. And so we want to say like a tree. So we say ke etz. Ke etz is just the letter that we use like that. You see, kaf is used a lot during when we use Hebrew. So we've done a lot of things today. Remember, kaf is the letter, it's called like that. Kaf is also the spoon, and kapit is the little spoon. See you next week. Bye.
Well, we hope you enjoyed that segment. We're doing these every week so that you're going to learn more about behind the scenes and what's happening in Israel and the Hebrew language. Thank you so much for joining us today. Don't forget you can email us at info@israelfirst.org. Visit the website www.israelfirst.org. And don't forget that this is the program that looks at the land, the people and the language.